lied and used fake documents to obtain the interview with my mother, made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
Prince William spent nearly 3 decades mastering the art of carrying silent grief, learning how to walk through the world without ever letting the public see the crushing weight on his shoulders. But inside a restricted vault beneath Windsor Castle, one secret palace document finally shattered that control forever. It was a file that was never supposed to see the light of day, a suppressed record buried deep within the royal archives, guarded by security protocols designed to protect the monarchy at all costs. But when the file surfaced, the chilling truth inside left the future king completely heartbroken.
These failings, identified by investigative journalists, not only let my mother down and my family down, they let the public down too.
The cover carried a title that made hardened archivists freeze: The Kensington Memorandum, Personal Protection of Prince William. It was a desperate, panicked warning, dictated by Princess Diana in the summer of 1997, just weeks before her life was cut short in Paris. When William reached the final paragraph, he stopped reading. He lowered the yellowed pages to the table, looked up at the stone walls around him, and asked a quiet, devastating question that no one in the room was prepared to answer. What did Diana write in those hidden pages that senior courtiers fought so fiercely to keep buried for nearly 30 years? Hit that subscribe button and join our community right here as this story unfolds. I spent months piecing together the exact paper trail that brought Prince William into that restricted vault. The story begins on a cold, grey afternoon when archivists uncovered a locked leather folio during a routine audit of uncatalogued royal correspondence. Catherine travelled with William to Windsor Castle that day, her presence serving as a steady shield against the growing tension. But when they arrived at the heavy, reinforced oak doors of the archive, she stopped. She knew this was a painful reckoning her husband had to face alone. The room inside was clinical, cold, and dead silent. Stone walls hummed softly with climate control systems designed to preserve fragile history and keep dangerous secrets locked away from public eyes. William sat in a heavy wooden chair before the single table in the center of the room. As he opened the folder, the smell of decades-old paper filled the space. He ran his fingers over the faded ink of his mother's voice, captured by an official dictation taker in June 1997. Diana had dictated the memorandum immediately after an explosive, behind-closed-doors meeting with senior palace officials. Her warning was direct, unyielding, and terrifying in its clarity. She wrote that her 15-year-old son was being pushed into an unbearable psychological war between his parents.
The letters, very much as a mother, somebody we can all relate to when talking about her children being naughty at school.
The princess documented William's sleepless nights, his constant anxiety, and his overwhelming fear of disappointing his father. But the most sinister revelation was what those senior officials had threatened to do. If Diana refused to obey palace demands after the divorce, they warned her that William's private visits with her would be severely restricted. Hi viewers, if you found a secret document showing your family hid the truth about your mother from you for 30 years, would you confront them or stay silent? William stood up so fast his chair scraped violently against the stone floor. The past closed in on him like a trap. His mother had seen every single tear he had tried to hide as a child. She knew he was suffering, even when he believed nobody in the world understood. Catherine opened the heavy door and stepped into the vault, unable to leave him in that darkness any longer. She found her husband standing over the table, his knuckles white as he pressed his hand flat against his mother's words. He turned to his wife, his face completely pale and his voice trembling with a mixture of raw grief and cold fury. He told her that Diana had known he was hurting. Then his voice hardened. Powerful people in this palace had known too, and they had buried her cry for help under 3 decades of official silence. As William turned to the final page of the memorandum, the wound cut even deeper into his heart. Diana wrote that a confidential palace strategy was being prepared to portray her as emotionally unstable if she publicly challenged the household. Then he noticed the physical damage to the document itself. The binding was broken, An attached page listing the specific names of the courtiers who issued the threat had been deliberately torn out. Someone had entered the vault years ago and sanitized the file. Someone had protected the culprits while leaving a mother's warning incomplete. When the chief archivist stepped forward and asked for the folder to be returned to its secure safe, William did not hand it back. He folded the leather folio, placed it inside his jacket, and looked the staff dead in the eye. He demanded the missing names, the missing page, and the reason his mother's plea had been hidden from him his entire adult life.
I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
He walked out of Windsor Castle, holding the truth, and a storm was about to hit the monarchy. To understand why Prince William walked out of Windsor Castle with fire in his eyes, I had to trace this story back to its exact origin. The date was June 1997. The place was a quiet, dimly lit private reception room in central London, moments after Princess Diana stepped off a stage at a charity event for vulnerable children. Outside, thousands of people cheered her name. Photographers flashed bright lights against the dark evening sky. Diana was at the absolute height of her global popularity. She was free from the strict confines of the royal household, yet every single step she took sent shockwaves through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. Palace officials were terrified. They believed a single unscripted word from her mouth could dismantle centuries of carefully constructed institutional control. That night, a high-ranking royal secretary met her behind closed doors. He did not offer praise for her humanitarian work. He did not ask about her well-being. He spoke in soft, measured, legalistic tones, but the message behind his polite language was ruthless. He warned Diana that if she gave another unsanctioned television interview, or if she continued to publicly challenge the decisions of the royal family, her personal access to her children would be re-evaluated. Specifically, 15-year-old Prince William's private visits with his mother would be reconsidered for what the courtier called his emotional stability. Think about what that meant. They were not threatening her titles. They were not threatening her financial settlement. They were using her teenage son as leverage. Diana did not scream. She did not shed a single tear in front of him. Her reaction was far colder, far more calculated than that. She pushed her chair back, looked the senior official directly in the eyes, and told him that no one would ever use her son's love as a weapon again. That very night, she called a trusted advisor through a secure private line. Her voice was trembling with anger, but her mind was completely focused. By sunrise the next morning, Diana sat in her sitting room at Kensington Palace and dictated the Kensington Memorandum. She named the official. She documented the exact threat. She described in agonizing detail how William was already struggling under the weight of his parents' public feud, suffering from sleeplessness and hiding his pain behind quiet obedience. She demanded that this document enter the official royal record so the truth could never be rewritten. 3 days later, the document was copied and stamped, but it never reached the public eye. Instead, an administrative log entry reveals that in late 1997, shortly after Diana's tragic death, the file was quietly moved into a restricted archive cabinet at Windsor Castle. It was sealed under a confidential authorization code, directly linked to the sovereign's private office. A record created to protect a child was systematically transformed into a state secret. The palace buried the document, assuming time would do what it always does, erase the evidence and silence the memory. They were wrong. Years later, as Prince William stood holding those creased pages, another crucial figure stepped into the investigation. Princess Anne. The Princess Royal had always been the quiet guardian of royal protocol, a woman who respected duty above all else. When she learned that the Kensington Memorandum had been pulled from the vault, she did not rely on second-hand reports. She went to the archives herself. Anne demanded the original historical access logs. She put on her glasses and examined the physical folder under heavy magnification. That was when she made a chilling discovery. The original red wax seal on the file was cracked. Someone had opened this folder long before Prince William ever set foot inside the room. Anne turned to the chief archivist and asked a direct, piercing question. When was the seal broken, and who authorized entry? William watched his aunt closely as she examined the paper ledger. He asked her if his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had approved the original decision to seal his mother's warning. Princess Anne hesitated. Her silence was heavier than any spoken word. The late Queen had indeed ordered the file locked away in 1997, fearing that if William read his mother's desperate words while he was still a boy, it would permanently destroy his trust in his father and the monarchy itself. It was an act intended to protect a fragile family from total destruction, but it left a young prince completely in the dark. Then Anne noticed something even more suspicious. A secondary notation written in faded blue ink in the margins of the archive ledger. The entry was dated 2002. That was the exact year Prince William turned 20, the exact moment he was granted expanded access to certain historical family papers. William leaned over the table and pressed his finger against the faded mark. Someone had entered the vault 5 years after Diana's death, just weeks before William was scheduled to review historical correspondence. Someone had deliberately removed the key-attached page containing the names of the courtiers who threatened his mother. It was not an accident. It was a cover-up executed by someone inside the royal household who feared what William would do when he grew old enough to understand. William looked up from the ledger, his gaze turning stone cold. The paper trail proved that the betrayal did not end in 1997. It continued into his adulthood. But who gave the order in 2002 to sanitize the file? And where is that missing page right now? What we discovered next takes this investigation into territory so dangerous, it threatened to spark an unprecedented constitutional crisis. In our next video, you will see the exact moment a retired, elderly palace courtier breaks down during a private interrogation and pulls a yellowed, 24-year-old sealed envelope from inside his coat pocket, revealing the names of the powerful men who tried to silence Princess Diana forever. You cannot afford to miss a single second of what comes next. Make sure your notifications are turned on right now, because the truth about who held that missing page will change everything you thought you knew about the royal family. Word of Prince William's possession of the Kensington Memorandum hit the inner circles of Buckingham Palace like a seismic shock. Within hours, the document was no longer treated merely as a tragic family relic. It became an institutional threat. Senior legal advisors convened emergency briefings behind heavy mahogany doors. Their mandate was swift and ruthless. Reclaim the file. They attempted to invoke complex legal precedents, arguing that any official correspondence generated within royal households belonged entirely to the Crown estate. They claimed it was a matter of state security and archival policy. But William was not listening to lawyers. He refused to hand over the folder. He made it clear that no official, no title, and no constitutional warning would ever force him to surrender his mother's voice again. Later that evening, the noise of palace bureaucracy faded into a suffocating quiet. William sat alone with Catherine in a small, private study at Windsor. No courtiers were permitted inside. No press secretaries stood in the doorway. Just a husband and wife sitting together in the shadow of a dark history. On the desk between them lay the folded pages of Diana's memorandum. William's hands were trembling slightly. Slowly, obsessively, he began folding and unfolding the final page. The paper creased back and forth under his fingertips. The soft sound echoed sharply in the quiet room. Catherine watched his face, seeing the raw, unhealed trauma of a 15-year-old boy surfacing through the composure of the heir to the throne. She reached across the table, placing her hand gently over his. She asked him to stop before the delicate paper tore. William looked down at the creased document. He looked up at Catherine, his voice thick with emotion. He told her these words did not feel like a ghost speaking from 1997. They felt like a direct warning written to the man he was today. Diana had written that her son was learning to hide pain before he even understood what to do with it. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had spent his entire adult life believing that his quiet obedience was a royal duty. In reality, it was a trap designed by men who needed his silence. Meanwhile, the tension spread across the highest ranks of the family. Princess Anne took immediate action. She did not call a committee. She did not send an intermediary. She carried the original archive access logs directly into King Charles's private study. She placed the yellowed ledger on his desk with a heavy thud. Charles sat behind his work table, surrounded by state papers, refusing to look up at first. But Anne would not let him hide behind royal duty. She pointed directly at the entry from 1997, and then at the erased notation from 2002. She looked her brother in the eye and delivered a stern, uncompromising truth. She told him that protecting the crown could never justify forcing William to inherit the exact same silence that had destroyed his mother. Charles turned his face toward the window. The silence in his study was agonizing. The king knew his sister was right. He admitted in a hushed voice that he no longer knew which choice caused less pain, confronting the past or continuing to bury it. Anne's response was swift and merciless. She told him that avoiding pain had already caused enough damage to last a lifetime. With Anne's backing, William ordered an immediate, independent audit of the archive logs. The trail quickly focused on that second date, 2002. An investigator tracked down a retired records officer who had managed the vaults during that exact period. Under a recorded private interview, the former officer made a startling admission. He confirmed that an attachment had been physically removed from the Kensington Memorandum in the spring of 2002. Why then? Because William was about to reach his 20th birthday, the landmark moment when he gained wider access to restricted family collections. The officer remembered the exact instruction he was given. He was ordered to purge any document that contained names or details too damaging for the young prince to see. The order was initialed by a former senior courtier, a man who had spent decades in the highest circles of power, serving both Queen Elizabeth and Prince Charles, a man who was still alive. William did not wait for official channels. He demanded a direct confrontation with the former courtier. When investigators pressed the elderly retired official about the missing page, they expected denial. They expected claims of poor memory or institutional duty. Instead, the old man broke. Under intense questioning, his composure collapsed completely. He admitted that he had taken the attached page carrying the names of the officials who threatened Diana, but then he revealed something that sent a chill through everyone in the room. He had not destroyed it. For 24 years, he had kept that missing page locked inside a small metal safe in his private residence. He confessed that he kept it because he lived in constant terror of the day Prince William would finally grow up, look into the archives, and demand the absolute truth. He had carried the guilt of that missing page like an iron weight around his neck for over 2 decades. When news of the courtier's confession reached William, the prince issued an ultimatum that shook the palace to its foundation. He ordered the retired courtier to bring the unopened envelope to Windsor Castle immediately. No lawyers, no excuses. If anyone attempted to stop the delivery, William warned he would take his mother's original memorandum and release it directly to the global press. The stage was set for a terrifying reckoning. What happens when that 24-year-old envelope is finally unsealed in front of Prince William and Princess Catherine? In our next video, you will see the exact heart-stopping moment the missing page is opened, exposing the names of the specific palace officials who threatened Princess Diana, and the devastating final message a mother left for her son before she died. The truth that was kept hidden for nearly 3 decades is finally laid bare, and what it reveals will leave you completely speechless. Make sure you are subscribed and your notifications are turned on right now, because you cannot afford to miss a single second of the shocking climax. The air inside the secluded Windsor study was heavy enough to crush a man. The retired courtier walked into the room carrying no briefcase, no legal files, and no prepared defense. He looked exhausted. Decades of carrying a quiet lie had broken his posture. As I pieced together the witness accounts of that afternoon, the tension in that room was suffocating. The old man stood quietly before Prince William, Catherine, and Princess Anne. King Charles had been notified of the meeting, but he deliberately stayed away, knowing his presence might silence the courtier before the whole truth could surface. The courtier reached slowly inside his coat pocket. He pulled out a yellowed, faded paper envelope. The seal was still intact after 24 years. He set it down on the wooden table. Catherine reached forward. Her fingers were steady. She carefully opened the old envelope and handed the restored page to her husband. William's hands tightened around the paper until his knuckles turned white. He began to read. This was the page removed in 2002. This was the missing link. What Diana wrote on that single sheet was not a bitter strike against the royal family. It was not a political maneuver. It was a plea written in raw, unvarnished pain. She wrote that if anything ever happened to her, her eldest son must one day be told the absolute truth. She wrote that she had fought with every breath in her body for her children's freedom to love both parents without being punished for it. The words struck William harder than any formal accusation ever could. His mother had not been demanding victory over the palace. She had simply been asking that her boys be spared from an adult war. The restored page also confirmed something that altered my entire understanding of this cover-up. Queen Elizabeth II had indeed been informed of the threat made by the senior secretary in 1997. The late monarch had acted immediately, ordering the responsible official removed from direct contact with Diana. But to prevent another public collapse of the monarchy, she commanded that the incident remain sealed. Her decision stopped the immediate pressure on Diana, but it preserved the wall of silence around her children. Charles had been told at the time that the issue was resolved. He never asked to read Diana's full statement. That did not make him the architect of the threat, but it left him responsible for accepting easy answers without demanding the truth. Now, there was nowhere left to hide. William took the restored memorandum, walked down the long carpeted hallway of Windsor, and pushed open the door to a secluded sitting room, far from the formal state apartments. Inside, King Charles sat alone at a small table. No private secretaries stood in the corners. No legal advisors adjusted their glasses behind files. No courtiers waited outside the door. For the first time in nearly 30 years, the machinery of the monarchy was completely shut out. There was only a father who had failed to ask enough questions, and a son who had spent his life wondering if his mother's pain ever mattered to the people who survived her. William entered the room carrying the full document. He did not sit down. He walked up to his father and placed Diana's original memorandum alongside the restored page, directly in front of the king. He looked at his father and asked one direct, brutal question. "Did you know they threatened to use me against her?" Charles looked at the yellowed pages, but he did not touch them. He had already read copied extracts provided by his staff, but William wanted him to face Diana's actual handwriting, the jagged pen strokes where her anger had broken through her restraint. The king admitted that he knew there had been an intense dispute over Diana's access to the children after the divorce. He insisted he had never authorized anyone to threaten her. William's voice did not rise. It grew colder. He looked at the king and told him that failing to stop the pressure was still a choice. Charles tried to explain the institutional pressure of 1997. He told his son that the household had been desperately trying to protect William and Harry from endless, destructive public conflict. The prince's restraint finally broke. Why, he demanded, did protection always require silence from Diana and complete obedience from her sons? Why had every adult decision left two innocent children carrying consequences they never created? Charles reached out toward the memorandum. William slammed his hand down firmly over the paper. Neither man moved. The silence in the room was suffocating. Finally, the king withdrew his hand. He realized his son was not going to let this document vanish into another locked vault. That was the moment the dynamic shifted forever. King Charles reached down to his hand. He slid off his solid gold signet ring and placed it softly on the table between them. That single gesture changed everything. A signet ring is the ultimate symbol of personal and royal authority. By setting it aside, Charles stripped the room of rank, title, and royal protocol. He was no longer the sovereign speaking to his heir. He was a father speaking to his son. He looked at William and admitted that the palace culture of the 1990s rewarded containment over compassion. Problems were managed. Emotions were treated as dangerous liabilities. Charles admitted he had relied on advisors because facing Diana directly had become emotionally exhausting. Then he looked his son in the eye and said something no monarch had ever said to an heir. "I was afraid that asking more would make everything worse. I understand now that not asking was also a choice." The anger in William's eyes gave way to a deeper, older pain. He looked at his father and confessed the terrible burden he had carried since he was 15 years old. He admitted he had always feared that his childhood silence, his choice to obey and say nothing, had made his mother feel abandoned in her darkest hours. Charles answered immediately, without a single second of hesitation. No child should ever carry responsibility for the failure of adults. For the first time in his life, William allowed his grief to exist without turning it into a royal duty or an accusation. He did not offer instant forgiveness, but he accepted his father's admission as honest. They agreed that the Kensington Memorandum would be preserved in its entirety, attached to an official historical note, explaining that Diana had raised valid concerns about her children's emotional welfare. Father and son left that room wounded, but honest. Yet as William walked out into the courtyard of Windsor, the story took a sudden and unpredictable turn, because while the dispute between father and son was settling behind closed doors, a massive public storm was breaking outside palace walls. A plain black vehicle was spotted leaving Clarence House under heavy police escort, carrying locked security cases containing Princess Diana's long-disputed personal jewelry, returning it under strict legal authority. What was inside those locked cases? And how did a secret court judgment force Queen Camilla into an unprecedented public surrender that changed the royal family forever? In our final chapter, you will see the extraordinary, nationwide fallout as Diana's unburied truth reaches the public, forcing King Charles to make a devastating choice between his current queen and the legacy of his eldest son. You cannot afford to miss a single second of this historical climax. Make sure you are subscribed and hit that notification bell right now, because the final revelation will leave you completely stunned. By sunrise the following morning, the secrecy holding the Kensington Memorandum inside Windsor Castle had completely collapsed. News of the recovered document broke across national television broadcasts, front pages, and radio networks. But the news reports did not dwell on archive catalogue codes or legal technicalities. They focused on one devastating, haunting image: a young mother in 1997, terrified and alone, trying to shield her teenage son from the cold mechanics of royal power. Across the country, the revelation reopened wounds that had never truly healed. Outside the iron gates of Kensington Palace, hundreds of people began to gather in silence. They brought bouquets of white roses. They left handwritten notes on the cobblestones. One newspaper printed a full-page photograph of Diana beneath 5 simple words: "She tried to protect her boy." I watched the media storm build with intense velocity. Commentators debated whether this discovery would tear the royal family apart or permanently alter the future of the monarchy. They asked if the palace would revert to its old habits of secrecy, denying the document's contents to protect institutional pride. King Charles faced immediate, intense pressure from his senior advisors. They urged him to issue a formal statement, challenging how the memorandum was being interpreted by the public. They wanted him to defend the household's historical actions, but the king flatly refused. He looked his communications team in the eye and told them that defending himself now would only silence Diana all over again. He understood that one wrong word could instantly destroy the fragile honesty he had just reached with his eldest son. William knew he could not stay silent while others defined his mother's words. He refused to let her pain be turned into public entertainment or political ammunition. He stepped before a single camera inside Kensington Palace to deliver a brief, recorded address. His voice was steady, but you could hear the tight wire of emotion beneath every word. He did not call for revenge. He did not condemn his father. He stood before the nation as a son. He confirmed that he had read the unredacted memorandum from start to finish. He told the world that the document was not about palace politics, public scandals, or institutional power. It was about a mother's fierce love for her children and her desperate attempt to protect them when they needed her most. Then he made a declaration that redefined his future reign. He said the monarchy must be strong enough to preserve painful truths rather than bury them in restricted vaults. Watch his words closely. He was not just speaking about the past. He was drawing an absolute line between the old crown and the leadership he intends to bring. Immediately following that public address, William convened a final private meeting inside Windsor Castle. Present in that room were King Charles, Catherine, Princess Anne, and senior household officials. William laid out a binding reform that would forever change how children inside the royal family are protected. It is known as the Royal Family Welfare Protocol. Under this formal, unalterable policy, no royal child can ever again be used as leverage in disputes between households, courtiers, or family members. Any concern regarding a child's emotional or psychological well-being must be documented independently and reviewed outside palace control. No courtier can order a file sanitized. No private secretary can threaten a parent's access to their child. Charles signed his approval without asking for a single change. He accepted that this new law inside the palace would forever be linked to Diana's memory. After the meeting concluded, the chief archivist brought the Kensington Memorandum back into the vault. Every single page, every signature, and the restored 2002 attachment were permanently catalogued into the official historical record. No secret authorization code can ever remove it. No future monarch can ever hide it again. Late that evening, after the advisors, lawyers, and staff had cleared out, Prince William walked back into the vault alone. The room was dark. The air was cold. The heavy leather folio rested on the wooden table under the soft glow of a single lamp. William walked to the table. He stood there for a long time, looking down at the dark cover that had held his mother's voice captive for nearly 30 years. Slowly, he reached out and placed his palm flat over the center of the folder. He leaned down, close to the paper, and whispered 7 words into the quiet room. "You were heard." It took too long, but you were heard. He was no longer the heartbroken 15-year-old boy, carrying silent grief through palace hallways. He had given his mother the one thing the institution had denied her in life: recognition, protection, and the absolute certainty that her voice would never be buried again. The discovery of the Kensington Memorandum did not prove that everyone inside the palace intended to harm Diana. It revealed something far more dangerous: how easily fear, pride, and institutional loyalty can allow a mother's desperate warning to be hidden away. But William broke that cycle. He faced the dark truth of his family's past without destroying his duty to the future. Father and son walked away from this crisis wounded, but finally honest with each other. Yet, just as one hidden palace file was catalogued into history, an even larger, more dangerous secret has begun to surface from the royal archives. In our next video, I will take you inside the unsealed 1999 Duchy of Cornwall financial ledgers, where a secret audit has just uncovered a paper trail showing millions of pounds quietly transferred into an off-books private trust, setting up an explosive legal battle between Prince William and Queen Camilla over the true ownership of the royal family's most valuable private estate. You cannot afford to miss a single second of what comes next. Make sure your notifications are turned on right now, because what is about to be exposed will rock the monarchy to its core.